Oh,
Yes.
nice. Lots of people coming from all over. This is exciting. We have Seattle, we have Modesto, we've got Indianapolis,
Wow.
Orange County, North Carolina, Orange County, California, Sacramento. Yes, welcome
Wow.
everybody. This is exciting. Exciting. So we'll give everyone a chance to log in.
Welcome, welcome.
Welcome. We're really, really excited about the work that we're going to be doing together. And really appreciate all of the support for the numbers of you who have registered and those who have not been able, who have registered but maybe can't attend until doing the self-study on their own. Hey, Aisha Bain from Baltimore, we see you. Guppy, we see you. Irina, we see you. So thanks everybody, really, really excited. So I'm Monica and this is Rachel and we'll share a little bit more about ourselves. But we want to spend the first 10 minutes grounding and just really talking about the purpose of this and how this came to be. So Rachel and I have the honor and privilege of being part of the Move to End Violence faculty team. And part of our work and our role with that faculty team, as part of the faculty, has been to bring our experience working with around racial justice, racial equity, and liberation frameworks into their cohort space. The cohorts are spaces where people come together who are working to end gender-based violence, who are some of the most generous and thought-provoking and really wonderful leaders who are community-based, who some are based in organizations, who are coming together to explore how do we do this? How are we going to work to end violence, gender-based violence here in the US? They are also, those folks are also connected to communities. So it's not just the cohort members that are represented, but all of their communities. And so our work has been to, if we're really serious about having a solid gender equity frame, then that has to be intersectional with a frame around racial equity. That those two things are not separate, that I cannot separate my Blackness from my womanness. I cannot separate my Blackness also from my sexuality from my class. So we know that this work is really crucial to the work of ending violence because it makes sure that everybody is included. So just to talk a little bit about what we're hoping to do in these next 6 weeks. So here, this is a space where we can actually look at some of the practices that we can engage in that are going to strengthen us. So there's the aspect of us that needs to have content, like what are we talking about when we say racism? What do we mean by structural disparities? That is really, really crucial and important, and that's a small piece of what we'll be doing. What we are looking at is who are we showing up as that are gonna help us to sustain the work? What are our relationships like so that we can actually be in active solidarity with one another? What are the ways in which we are growing and shifting that actually advance how we understand our own analysis? So here, we trust that everybody that has signed up and registered and taking the time out of your day and out of your week and from your communities to participate, that you are doing this because there's no negotiation around whether or not racism is a problem. You are fully committed to racism as something that needs to be addressed and solved. And we are here to talk about how do we do that? How are we stronger human beings so that we can be more effective in the work? Rachel, anything?
Yeah, welcome everybody. Just want to echo the excitement and enthusiasm for so many of you to sign up and join us on this journey. So welcome to this growing community. And just want to name that we're going to be talking a lot about practices and like the practices of liberation. And so what does that even mean to engage in practice? And it means that we're going to be interrupting our habits. Habits is repetitive, unconscious thoughts and unconscious actions, and really being intentional about creating practices that are intentional, thoughtful, that help us to interrupt those ways that can impact our relationships, our organizing, and our movement work. So we're going to use that language a lot throughout today and also throughout the series. And so this is really a space of practice.
Yeah. And it's important to have practice because we can have the right analysis but be disconnected, right, from what it is that we're doing. We can have the right analysis, the right language, the right words, but actually be defensive when people are challenging us on our own, the ways that we might be impacting others or causing harm. So the practice point is very crucial. And then when we talk about liberation, I know for myself as a community organizer, I was kind of shaped around like liberation is way over there. It's a destination, like in 45 years, we are going to get to liberation, right? And that is real and true because until we end the occupation of indigenous people, right, on this U.S. territory until we do not use mass incarceration as a way to penalize people, until we are not engaging in mass deportation and stigmatizing people who are not born in the U.S., until we are no longer invisibilizing the labor of domestic workers, we are ultimately not liberated. Well, while that is true, we also still want to live liberated lives. We want to have joy. We want to be connected. We want to practice vulnerability. So for us, liberation is a goal that we're trying to reach, but it's also a way that we're choosing to live our lives, that we are choosing to be bold and courageous in the midst of our work together. Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so we'll keep it moving a little bit. And we want to acknowledge the people, for those of you who are on video, the folks who are on the call with us. You may see some boxes at the top. And so we'll have our panelists, Archi and Heidi, share a little bit more about themselves. And also wanted to acknowledge Chelsea, Trina, and Kim, who are providing all of the infrastructure and support. And again, that work is often invisibilized. We don't really get to support and lift up those who are providing the administrative, the infrastructural support that make all of this fancy glamour look amazing. So yeah, we wanted to thank you for the support that you're providing, and those also in the MEV community. Yeah.
And so you should get to know who you're talking with, right? Who's here. And so we're going to give a little introduction about who we are. I'll start us off with my name. So my name is Rachael Marie Ibrahim. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I identify as a social work community organizer, as an activist, as a base builder. And some of the intersections that I live at, as I identify as a mixed race Black woman raised in largely white communities and white family. And I also identify as a artist and someone who was raised in the Midwest. And so all of those together, those are some of my intersections that I'm naming because it absolutely shapes why I'm doing this work. Growing up in the Midwest, especially in white communities, learning to not talk so heavily about race in my experience has absolutely been a motivating force for me to actually start organizing largely in schools and after school programs, because I felt that there was adults who are not prepared to really engage young people in the conversations that they were needing, to talk fully about our identities, to be able to talk about sexuality, to be able to talk about the drug use, to be able to talk about our real lived experiences. And so that motivation has absolutely prompted me to have urgency in being able to engage in difficult conversations, which includes conversations around racism. I also do this work because being raised in white communities, there's a lot of healing to be done, both between me and the community that I'm from, but also among mixed race people. And so I'm an organizer with, I organize a collective of mixed race Black women raised in largely white communities. So we can look at what's come up for us and where do we have areas of access and where do we also get to do healing among our own communities. And so I'm excited to be with you here today.
I'm Monica Dennis. I identify as a Black woman whose family has been here in the United States for many generations, at least 7 or more. So I am the descendant of sharecroppers and people who lived through many generations of enslavement, people who are rooted in the southern eastern part of the United States, primarily Georgia. Like all of my family's history is in Georgia. I am the descendant of farmers, of educators, of people who, of many generations of midwives. I'm the descendant of people who created community when they were not allowed and guaranteed access into institutions. So folks who really are very grounded in being in self-sustained, organized, uplifted Black communities, primarily in rural spaces. And I'm literally the first person in my maternal line that's born outside of the South. So I am born in New York City. I make my home in Brooklyn, but I was raised in the South Bronx, which is a community that was and still is very multicultural, around people who are from Latin America, from Spanish-speaking, English-speaking, French-speaking Caribbean, and those of us who would be identified as Black Americans, right? But all of those folks living together. And I do this work because even in the midst of my family experiencing like this duality of intense racial terrorism and still be able to sustain themselves and have joy and celebration and connection amongst themselves and their community. I want to be able to address what it means, address systemic oppression, and also celebrate my life and celebrate the life of other people. And also want to make sure that the opportunities for leadership, for advancement, for humanity are fully honored, because the way that the setup is right now, just because I choose to live an empowered life does not mean I have full access to power, even though I have a little bit more than my family did a few generations ago. So I do this work because I want people to I want us to know the fullness of who we can be as a country, as a people, as a global entity, as a global place. And so that's a little bit about who I am. My gender pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I have the pleasure of working with Rachael. Probably like 80% of the work that we do is together. So we're really excited. And we're just going to keep checking in. And there are some of you that are posting in the Q&A box, and just know that we're getting to some of your logistical questions around how to dial in and how to run the chat. So know that those are actually being answered. All right, so let's get to it when we say locating oneself.
Yeah, and we want to bring in our wonderful storytellers that we're so honored and thankful to have join us today. Archi, Pyati, and Heidi Lopez. Hello, welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
Wonderful. So we're actually going to ask you to go ahead and just share a little introduction about yourselves. And so just as we've located ourselves, please share a little intro about you. Your name, your pronouns, some of the intersections that you live at, and a little snapshot of who your people are.
Beautiful. Hi. Really excited to be here with
Heidi, we cannot hear you. We can see you moving your mouth, but we can't hear you.
I am not on mute, so I'm going to try again.
Okay.
I can hear Heidi.
Right, Archie, you want to go first? We can't hear you either, Archie. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, try now.
I think so.
Can you hear me now?
All right. Oh, thank you. We can't hear you, but the audience can hear you. So let's
All right.
keep going.
Good to know. Okay. So really excited to be here. And I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Heidi Maria Lopez, and my pronouns are she and they. And I am a Quisqueyana, so I'm first generation here in the United States, and because of that, consider myself a mutant, someone who is actively regenerating to figure out what it means to be on this land that is not ours through forced migration. I am born and raised in the United States, so I identify as a lifelong New Yorker, which has become a very strong part of my identity, born and raised in Washington Heights. I'm queer, I'm a woman of color, and I'm a writer, organizer, healer, and really do this work similarly to y'all, as you know, from a place of healing. So understanding the impact that these systems have had on us, and understanding that we get to be free, and we get to do that with joy as we also resist, and we get to heal in community. So this racial equity work is dear to my heart. It feels like it's on behalf of my ancestors and what brought us here, and also all of our futures. So I'm really happy to be here with y'all.
Thank you.
Awesome. So my name is Archi Pyati, and I'm so excited to be here. This has been a very exciting journey, going from beginning my time with Move to End Violence to this moment where we are doing this webinar. First, I want to say a deep thank you to Rachael and Monica for being teachers and guides in this journey. And of course to Trina and Heidi and the others who have been on this journey and are making this possible. I am Indian American. My parents are immigrants from India, and I come from a long line of men and women who have been oppressed by patriarchy and by colonialism. And I have a lot of very strong people in my background, including freedom fighters and women who have struggled deeply to build lives for themselves, to be educated, to educate their children. I carry the pain and the anger of generational oppression, but I also recognize that I also carry quite a bit of privilege. I am born and raised in the United States. I'm a US citizen. And I'm able-bodied, and I was raised with a fair bit of class privilege. I am the mother of two biracial children, and I stand strongly and firmly in the belief that my liberation and my realization of who I am and what I can be is completely bound up in that of my sisters and brothers across this country and around this world. I work at the Tahrir Justice Center, where I work with and alongside and for immigrant women and girls who have suffered violence and are trying to get free.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And we're just so thankful. We'll get to hear more and more as we go deeper into our stories and how we have integrated this practice of locating ourselves. And we'll know more as we go throughout today. And going from there, we want to know, what are we doing today? Now that you have a sense of who is on this call and on this webinar with you, our goals for today are really to one, start with a grounding and acknowledgement. So to really connect to the work that we're going to do, that we're going to make sure we're on the same page with these community agreements, and we'll revisit those every time. That we're going to frame the conversation today around locating oneself, so we have some shared language around what does it actually mean. And throughout our time, we'll get some insights, examples, both from Monica and I, and also from our storytellers. We're excited to take questions and have some polls with our viewers, and definitely some reflections, and then we'll close well together. And so that's our goal for today. And so what we're actually going to do is we're going to engage live with practice. The practice of grounding is essential in this work towards liberation. Oftentimes we can be disassociated from our bodies for many reasons, but also we're being pulled in many directions. And so an opportunity for us to ground helps us, one, to connect with our bodies, our minds, our energy. It can help us to be present to the current moment that we're in, so we can show up more full and whole. And knowing that racism is explicitly trying to destabilize us, and so it's important for us to be intentional about regrounding, so that way we can show up at our best. And so we're going to engage in a brief practice now that's going to support us wherever we are. So just going to invite everyone to find a comfortable position. We're going to take about a minute to ground. Grounding could take a lot longer than that, but we're going to take a minute today. And I'm just going to ask you to move your body into a position that feels comfortable. So if that's getting your feet on the floor, if that's kind of rolling your shoulders back, if it's closing your eyes or lowering your gaze, doing whatever works for you. And as you adjust your body, just be mindful of your heartbeat and your breath, and allow them to align. As you continue to breathe, allow your breath to deepen and let it fill all of your body. Acknowledge any thoughts that may surface or any responsibilities that may be pulling your attention away from this moment, and just acknowledge them and release them. And at your own pace, taking 3 slow, deep breaths, just allow your breath to continue to expand. Bring yourself present. Might be wiggling your toes or fingers, opening your eyes.
Thank you, Rachel. All of this is part of, again, liberatory practice. All of this is connected to locating ourselves. And so all of the work that we do is also grounded in acknowledgements, because systems of oppression are actively trying to strip us of our stories and strip us of those people who have created openings for us to do this work. And so we do nothing without acknowledgements. And so we first acknowledge the land upon which we are on, where we are from in Brooklyn. This is the land of the Canarsie indigenous people who are no longer here, but we acknowledge the land and the many lessons that the land teaches us. And we also take time and space to acknowledge indigenous people of Turtle Island, for whom this is their land, and colonialism and occupation is still a very current reality for them. We acknowledge our many mentors and elders who make it possible for us. So Rachael and I are an extension of so many communities. Some of the names that you see here on the screen, people who've informed our growth, our analysis, our teachers, and in particular the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, which really created a space for us to train, to learn, to fall down, to get up. So many of those folks, Ron and Diana and Marjorie and David and Kim, Monica, Angela, all of them. And we also want to acknowledge those who are coming after us, right? Whether or not we have biological children, but that we do this work because we're trying to create a world for our descendants in the biggest possible way.
That's right. That's right.
And if there's somebody that you want to acknowledge, right, some of the justice seekers in your life, put them in the chat box as well, right? Because it's important, as those stories are often taken from us. And we don't think that we're not allowed to remember the heroes and sheroes and folks that we have in our life who are justice seekers. So we'd love to see some of those names in the chat box.
That's right.
Yeah, Polly Murray, Nadine Cruz, Henry and Vivian, yes. Ama and Nanaya, Shoshana, Connie, the justice seekers at Stonewall, Lolita Lebron, Loretta Ross, Nancy, Yuri Kochiyama, Asada, Eugene Walter, Lisbon Berry, and so many more. Yeah, and so while we're looking at the names and creating space and honoring them, and this is all connected, right? So if you're thinking, when are we gonna get to the topic? This is the topic. This is the topic. Locating ourselves, locating our history, calling our people forth, our mothers, our fathers, our ancestors, yeah.
That's right. And Heidi and Archie, is there anyone you'd like to name?
Belkis Antonia Garavito Lopez.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'll name Sulakshana Murthy and Sumitra Bai.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. It's so beautiful to see all these names pouring in, just giving honor and gratitude. We are because they are.
Yes.
And so we're also going to talk about how we can continue to hold all of our people, this conversation, hold community, by looking at our community agreements. And so you all probably have seen this before. When you registered, you had a nice little checkbox where you were able to agree to these community agreements before joining. And we're just going to revisit them because this is also a practice of agreement of how we hold space together. And so we actually have a long list of community agreements, and this is just a little snapshot to get us going, right? And so I'm going to go over these real briefly so we can just keep them actively in the forefront of our minds. And so we're asking folks to commit to active listening, to really be engaged and present with what's being shared. Be present, right? So we all have that internal chatter that has had a lot of practice, right? A lot of habitual engagement in our minds. And so asking us to really be present and to silence our internal chatter. That we all have room to grow, and that we're going to invite everyone to push through your growing edge wherever that may be, and to stay with us. To recognize that there's no quick fix. We do not think that racism is going to end tomorrow, although I'm going to act as though that's what we're working towards.
Yes.
But we recognize that there's no quick fixes, and that quick fixes can often cause harm. And so really being able to be with this information, with these experiences, is part of the work. That we're going to invite you to trust the process. maybe not knowing why we're asking certain questions or the direction where we're going, but trusting that we as Black women can actually lead this work, and inviting you to be with us in that process. That we're going to look at racism and look at oppression through a lens of racism and not as oppression in silos and separated, but really looking at the intersections of oppression, and for us to bring the fullness of our identities without erasing the conversation of racism. And then lastly, we're going to ask you to engage in a practice that leads with acknowledgement, no matter what our intention is. If even when we say that phrase, "Oh, I didn't mean to," we understand that that can often be the case, but that's not a starting point for healing. It's not a starting point for liberation. A starting point for this conversation is acknowledging the impact that we've had on others, no matter what our intention is. So those are the agreements we're going to ask everyone to agree to.
So the frame that we do our work in, one of the frames that really helps to ground us, is that it's important to think about systems of oppression are actively engaging us in many ways, but these are 4 that we want to highlight. When they're trying to systems of oppression are working to disconnect us from our source. And by source, for that depends on how you relate to source. So for some, that means the divine or a creation. For others, it is their people. For some, it is your purpose. For others, it is your land base, right? So systems of oppression are actively disconnecting us from our source, dissociating us from our body. So if you look at the history, the way that mechanisms of control are happening at all times around people's bodies, who can have babies, who can't, whose labor is paid for, whose labor is not, whose labor is invisibilized and who's not. It's also working to distance us from our emotions, right? That we would be so disengaged from our emotions, and that emotions actually would not be experienced as a way of knowing what is happening to you, right? So oftentimes we have to prove that we're having an experience when we're trying to name how oppression is working. We can't actually talk about how we feel about the impact of oppression. And it's distorting story. It's constantly trying to create a new story that does not center people's actual realities for the purposes of maintaining itself, right? So when we think about some of the narratives that are playing over and over, we have to really unpack for what purpose. And so our process is to work at all times to reconnect to our source, to reclaim our bodies in whatever way we decide to do that, to re-engage our emotions wherever we decide to do that, and to restore or to reclaim our stories. And so that's where we come from. So this practice of locating oneself is really about self-awareness, right? What is it that I know about myself, my people, and my people in the broadest sense of the word, and also in a narrow sense. So it's not about so for me, I can only go back because of enslavement, I can only go back so far in my people's history, and yet I still have people. So this is less about doing a family tree, which is important, or doing genealogy, which is important. But when I think about my people in terms of class, in terms of being farmers, in terms of being Black people, in terms of being Black people born in the United States, what do I know about their experience and how history has shaped that? And what is the relationship of me knowing my social locations as it relates to Rachael, whose family, who identifies as a Black woman, but her family's starting point is not in the United States, right? Being a Nigerian American woman. That it is crucial that we know how our identities are showing up, what they are, how they show up, and what the impact is. And that there's a process that we go through that is ongoing, right? And so it's not just about I'm going to do a grid or do a checklist or do my family history and I know my social locations or how I choose to identify myself. It's really a process of exploration that happens many times and informs how we approach movement building. It informs where there might be opportunities for healing. It informs so much. So that's what we mean by locating oneself, the practice of deepening our own historical understanding of our identities and how they're related to other people and what might be happening between us.
That's right. Yeah. We are experienced. The history of our identities is how others are engaging us, whether or not that's what we want, right? And so knowing that, the more we know that, the more we can be effective, connected, strategic about how we show up. And so I actually want to ask, Archi, if you could speak a little bit about what's been your journey in locating yourself. What has that process been like for you?
Sure, thanks, Rachael. It hasn't been an easy one. I think it's been it's been somewhat surprising. I think from the beginning of my sort of advocacy, activism, and career, I had really sort of intellectualized why I do what I do. I'd always been able to draw a very nice linear line between the choices I'd made as a child to my high school education, other education, and then all the way through to every job I'd had. And then when I stopped and started thinking about where am I from, really, the first question that came, I think, through this process was, who are your people, to me? And I did not know how to answer it. I didn't know what you meant. I didn't know, even the fact that I couldn't answer it without knowing more about what was in your mind was, even that was a lesson to me, that actually this is about who I identify as my people. I have a right to own my people, my history, my background, and understand how survivorhood and the history of oppression really, and my privilege really bring me to the place where I'm doing the work I'm doing. And it allows me to expand in that work and be more fully present in it as a whole person, not simply saying, I'm doing this work for an intellectual purpose, but I'm doing this work because it comes straight from my heart. And that is, I think, that's the journey I've been on. Like I said, it hasn't always been easy, because it has meant, looking at myself and saying, look, people have not always been nice to me in this country because of the color of my skin, or because of, the fact that I am perceived as an immigrant. I'm from an immigrant family, and I don't feel like I belong. And so, what does that mean? Does that mean how do I label myself, and who can I relate to? Are we all people of color? Or are there distinctions in there? Are there experiences that are worth lifting up, that are different from me, Heidi, Monica, Rachel, others who might be listening? I think it's been very challenging to both hold the privilege and hold the other pieces of it, and really accept and honor that and own it.
That's right. Beautifully said, Archie. I think a lot about how, that it's sometimes when we locate ourselves, it's easier to connect with the parts that can be more painful, and that we don't always look at the full picture. So, for example, for me, even though, yes, I identify as a Black woman, and as I continue to locate myself, how did I come to this point where I'm at today also requires me to look at, I was raised largely in white communities, and how I've absorbed a lot of white culture in my way of being, showing up in the world. And so holding how that has given me access to higher education, even though I came from a poor white family, and that there was ways in which they had access that allowed me to be where I am, and at the same time have a very clear experience as a Black cisgendered woman in the United States. So thank you so much.
Yeah, Heidi?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, the practice of locating myself has been I'll call it a beautiful struggle, because it's really it's created so much, right, complex, like it's unearthed so much joy, and also so many more questions, as many as it's answered. And so I think about so many parts of my identity, similar to Archie growing up, very much feeling like I was located in what I was not. But the question about what am I located in was like, oh, what does it mean to be an immigrant, and what is forced migration? Like, what hand did the United States have in my parents even coming to this country? What does it mean to be part of the African diaspora and to say I am Black as a way to challenge anti-Blackness in my community, for instance, and then also say, and I don't have the experience of Black folks who, like Monica said, have generations upon generation and a very different experience through enslavement here in the United States. So while it answers a lot of questions in some ways and has provided a real source of healing to say, who am I? Who do I get to say I am, not just reacting to what people are saying, who people are saying I am, how they are saying I am. How do I also then really build relationships thoughtfully with folks has been one of the things, and thoughtfully with myself. I think about all the ways that that's unearthed things that I've internalized that just, they don't belong to me. They belong to these systems. They belong to other people naming me, and that I really, locating myself has given me a chance to, as the slide says, reclaim my relationship to my body, reconnect with my story, and do all of those things in community and with other people so that I can do that responsibly.
Beautiful.
Yes. So there are so many people asking whether or not the presentation will be available after the webinar. So you'll get a recording of this as well as the slides and all of the artwork. And as we kind of move through, we have a question, a poll that's up for those of you who are watching on video, who are able to access the video. So the question is, when in social settings, to what aspect of your identity are people most likely to respond? That is multiple choice, right? So are they responding to your race or your tribal affiliation, gender, age, ability, sexuality, class, citizenship status, right? And so what's been your experience? If you can answer that a little bit. And also wanted to share that this will be transcribed, right? So it's also available to communities or who might be deaf or hard of hearing. So we'll make sure that there's a transcription, transcription is that the word? Yeah. Transcript available to everybody, all right? And so I feel like you're starting to take us into that question when we do around relationships, like how your relationships have changed. So part of our approach to racial equity and liberation is really grounding in 3 principles. Rachael and I take nothing on unless we know these 3 things are in play. And that is 1, any work that we're doing actually has to strengthen our relationships. And so that doesn't mean that we're not going to have conflict. So we are folks who are very committed to feedback. We are not feedback resistant. Part of the way that systems of oppression also works is to not allow us to engage in real critical, hard questions for fear that the conflict itself is divisive. And we say, no, that is not true. That conflict and tension can create opportunities for growth, expansion, and liberation. So we ground ourselves in our relationship building. We also say that if we're not all like having some common understanding of what we're talking about and the analysis and building a shared analysis, then we are, like at band practice, all playing the wrong song, right? So we want to make sure that there's some like commonality, not that our experiences, we're not going for consensus, we're going for like, when you say that that illegal is actually dehumanizing language, I have some understanding of what you're saying, and I'm committed to that, even though I am a person who has citizenship, right? That's what we're talking about. And centering histories, that there are multiple histories in this work. And so we put that in a frame also around locating ourselves. And you started to talk about like how your relationships have gotten stronger. And we see that when the results of the poll here, that the majority of us are being engaged in social settings around our race and our gender, and then followed closely by age, class, sexuality, citizenship, and then tribal affiliation. And also wanting to highlight that tribal affiliation, even though it might show up as a small quote unquote result, we have to be able to connect that to the fact that the invisibilization of Indigenous people in this country and why we may not be able to see their experiences as being very visible. So the actual percentage tells us a lot as we're doing this locating ourselves. Yeah.
That's right. And so as we talk about relationship building, I want to, again, turn to our storytellers to hear a little bit about how has the practice of locating yourself help to strengthen your relationships, and whether that's the personal intimate relationships, but also in our movement work. And I would love to hear, Heidi, could you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. The more that I was able to answer these questions and get in touch with the ways that I wasn't connected, right, and was trying to reconnect, the more that I also realized, like, what was the impact of that on my body? So not just the realization, but then uncovering impact. And so I remember I spent many years, almost 15 years, working in nonprofits. And I used to be called Popo in one of them. And I remember, just really thinking about what were the elements that I was bringing at that time that felt like they were grounded in love, and that they were grounded in what I felt like I needed and other folks needed, that really was mostly connected to how disconnected I was to myself and my people, and sort of playing into who I thought I needed to be. So I talk about the healing aspect as something that is really true, that I was able to, in getting in touch with my source, in getting connected with my people, realize that, working people 20 hours a day, asking them to do things that were unethical, and that to my eyes at that time felt right, really were about not extending compassion to myself, not extending, love to myself, and then transferring that to other people. And so I feel like the primal relationship that changed was my relationship to myself. And once I was able to extend those things to myself, then I was able to extend them to other people, especially my people, because my sense of urgency around, we got to get free right now, really had me reenacting a lot of the very things that I thought I was fighting against, right? That I would say in principle, this is what liberation looks like, and then in fact be enacting violence against myself and other folks. So I want to say that, the relationship that changed was with myself, and in that process then transformed the way that I organize with people. And I think about the work that I do uptown now with my collective La Sala in Washington Heights, and how grounding and connecting with each other and storytelling is such a primal part, essential component of our organizing now, and the switch that has happened by answering these questions and other, engaging in this work of racial equity.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And as we said, none of these can be done in isolation. It's so important that they're done in community. For us to do our own personal reflective work, but where are we being held accountable and doing this in community? You just highlighted that beautifully.
Yeah.
Archie, would you like to share a little about where you've seen your relationship strengthen?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, I echo everything Heidi said in terms of it starting with, a deeper relationship to self. I think I'm still very much, I think this is a continuing learning process for me. I don't feel like I've, achieved the location of myself. I think that there is it's a practice I'm getting more used to. I am practicing as I do it. And I think the times when it has come up for me, first to think about myself, then to think, how do I present myself? How am I going to tell my story? How am I going to introduce myself to this audience or this group or this individual that I'm interacting with? In a professional setting or in an activism setting, it certainly has helped me to break down boundaries. It has helped me to own some of my own, that urgency, the things I get from privilege, the perfectionism, the worshiping the written word, being so, driven to kind of be on time for everything. These things have dialed back for me. And I think my openness and willingness to sort of see many forms of contribution, many ways that we can all be a part of the struggle has been really important to me. And also, I think very specifically in my personal life, I certainly, I realized about a year ago, I think it was at Thanksgiving about a year and a half ago, that my family, my native family, so my parents and my siblings sat around a dinner table and had a 3 or 4 hour, deep philosophical and angry and forward-looking conversation about race. And I had never seen that in my life before at that level, and so charged and so raw and so real. And I was thinking like, wow, look where they've come. And then I realized, no, this is where I've come. I think these conversations have been happening, but I don't think I had the ears for them. I don't think that I had the presence for them. And now being here, being an agent of my own, connection to myself is creating space for me. And it's showing my family and others around me that I'm here to help create space with them. So I think it's changing completely the way I'm approaching my personal and my sort of activism and work life.
That's right.
Yeah. Rachael, any thoughts about, like, I know you do a lot of work. One of our premises is to do work with our own people in our own communities, and we have many people. So I'm curious about like how your relationships with white people, right? Because they are your people. They're all of our peoples, but they're your people in particular. Like, what have you seen?
Yeah.
In your experience? Well,
and what's so interesting is, I think about even for us as all folks of color on this session. To really be looking at, this is not just a practice for people of color. This is really an essential practice for white people too. And so working with my family to talk about, how did we come to be here? We, in a very expansive way of looking at that, has been important. When I think about a lot of the white people who I organize with and who I have close relationships and friendships with, the accountability and the trust is built because, one, they know where they come from, and they know that part of where they come from is being able to recognize where they've had access historically and where they have access present day, where that privilege shows up, that allows us to actually be very strategic in our friendships and also in our work. And so really, this is also an invitation, an urgent call for white folks to really be able to dig into, where are your people from? How did they come to be where they are? What is the impact that that's had on your life? And how does that influence your role and how you're seen as a leader?
We have a reflection here about how do you connect to yourself when you don't feel a part, in particular, being part of your white family, and like you feel like you don't belong there. And this is something common, right, that we see in white communities. The shame that happens, the guilt for a variety of reasons, and the distancing that happens. And so not wanting to associate with people who have either the wrong politic or who've hurt us, who have done many things and many situations, and yet we would say that reality exists in all communities. And part of what happens in the absence of being in relationship with white communities in healthy ways, for white people to be in relationship with white communities, is that their exploration around locating themselves, around deepening their analysis, is actually happening at the hands of people who actually are not invested in their best interests, right? And so we see disenfranchised and poor working class white folks who are being organized by a particular politic or rhetoric that actually doesn't serve them. And yet part of that is because white people are not socialized to identify as a racial group. Race is something for everybody else, like Native folks are people of, everybody else has race but white people. So part of that being lost that people may be experiencing is intentional. And so in order to be disruptive to systems of oppression and to actually go back to find out, when did your people become white? People in the biggest sense, right? What has been the journey? What privileges have been afforded to my community, even when I don't feel like there's privilege? So it's an essential process, because we're in too many spaces where policies are being made, we're running programs, we're in conversations, and we are missing the mark because white people are not socialized to identify as a racial group when you actually are, right? And that's part of it.
Yeah, y'all are posting some really powerful questions. Yes. So I'm just trying to read them as we go. And knowing that part of locating ourselves also requires us to grieve some of the aspects of our identities and our histories. And the more we distance from doing that work, the harder it is to actually go forward. And so part of this work is actually, it's very deep. It's very deep, it's very personal, in order for us to show up in solidarity with other communities.
And as we said in the beginning, we're challenging ourselves and inviting ourselves to think of our people in the broadest sense, right? Not to separate and to silo out and to only think culturally, ethnically, but we're thinking about around our sexuality, around our citizenship status, around whatever it is that we're choosing, who our people are, and knowing that there is an actual intersection with racism. Yes.
And as we talk about this as as building relationships, we also recognize, I'm seeing the comment around, what about when it's not safe to do so in public spaces? This is also where we get to connect with our people, and do that in spaces that are affirming. It's not about having to do it everywhere in every public space, but where do we get that practice in our own communities, where we're building trust and connection.
So I'm curious, Archie and Heidi, where have you, so we've been talking about it a little bit, but where has your analysis actually, I'll start with you, Archie, where has your analysis actually gotten stronger because you did this practice?
It's a good question. I think for me, I've been also watching these comments come through, and so many of them are really resonating with me, because I think it's in those spaces that are not the usual on the checkbox list that my analysis is getting stronger, and that my sort of antennae are up, and I'm understanding privilege in a new way, my own privilege, and also how it shows up. And some of that has to do with colorism. I saw that raised, that there can be many of us called, who are Indian American, but there are color grades. We have the caste system still, unfortunately, labeling many of us by our last names and by how we look and how we present when we're talking to each other in our own community, but then even outside. Certainly religion. whether we're hetero or queer or how we identify that way, whether we're cisgender or trans, or somewhere in between. There's a lot, I think, that is not always, uplifted. And I think for me, my analysis really has gotten at the same time flattened, like kind of broadened. So I feel like I had some sort of very rigid sense of what does it mean to be intersectional. It means you're looking at race and you're looking at gender and you're looking at, this, and you snap them together almost like they're, Legos or building blocks, and then you have your analysis. And I think for me, what has happened is a breaking down of that and an understanding that we very easily single story ourselves and allow ourselves to be single storied when we view ourselves that way. And so I have to own and hold all the different pieces, some of which are still in flux, some of which are about me and how I present myself today and how I might be perceived tomorrow. I can change things about myself and be perceived differently, and so can you. I think my analysis in particular around understanding where pieces of ending violence is actually racialized has been really shifted. And so I think for me, coming into violence work, it's all been, as I said earlier, it seemed linear, but it's all been something of a mishmash. And now realizing that sitting at this intersection between immigration and ending violence, as I do in my activism and in my work, I have to every day call on this ability to kind of break down and say, wait a second, we're talking about violence in a certain community, and the more we hold that up to policymakers, the more we are racializing that community and perpetuating stereotypes about that community. So our own activism could be a problem. We have to reframe and reanalyze and represent. Otherwise, we're just perpetuating the same things we've been trying to fight. And so I think for me, applying the racial analysis overlay, and then doing that now little by little with other sort of aspects has been really enlightening. And I think has really shifted the way I'm doing the advocacy that I'm doing. And I think it helps me show up in community a little bit better. I hope so.
That's right. And what you're naming and making the connection to is how, as we deepen our analysis, in order for us to deepen the analysis, we actually have to be able to center our history. Mm-hmm. If we understand the history of violence in the United States, if we understand that it has been racialized, if we understand, that violence has many forms, it's mm-hmm. not only one way that violence has been enacted. The more we deepen that, the more we can understand and deepen our the more we deepen our historical understanding, the deeper our analysis mm-hmm. is. And so,
absolutely.
And so, really would love to hear a little bit about, when we look at the our historical framework, what are the ways in which locating yourself is actually interrupting interrupting violence? Mm-hmm. As we continue to locate ourselves, what is possible? And so, Heidi, are you able to jump in on that one?
I'd love to. And, I think about the immigrant experience and some things that I often hear in my community, like having this like bootstrap mentality, right? Like, oh, we just got to this country and look how far we've made it, right? And without really understanding history, Latin American, Spanish-speaking Caribbean folk in general will say stuff like that, and we'll be talking about Black folks, African Americans from the United States very specifically as a way to say, well, I don't know why that particular group hasn't made it. So that is violent, and it really is violence against ourselves because, again, it keeps us from being able to see each other as fully human and create solidarity and relationships on a larger scale. And then, like, just between people to people, right? Like literally the neighbors that we will not get to know. And some of those folks are even within our own family, right? And so I think about the separation that occurs on many levels when we really do not understand our full histories. And I mean that, we say we keep grandma in the closet if, she's dark skinned enough. So I really do mean that on a very interpersonal level. As well as on a systemic level. I also, like I said, I really cannot overstate enough the violence that we sometimes enact on ourselves. We take on white dominant culture, which Archi was talking about so beautifully, and really take it in as if it's our own. Showing up on time, that's just not my people's way. That's not, certain, we actually connect, and when we bring joy through dancing and talking loudly and raucously about all types of things, and there's a certain kind of politeness and like smiling that we don't always do, and that oftentimes I know I have conformed to and been a part of as a way to survive, to keep it 100, to say, how can I keep this job? How can I not really, shake things up so that I don't get myself kicked out of this apartment, And so I really think about the ways, the violence that we enact on ourselves, that I've enacted on me and on other people, because then I start policing other folks, right? Like, if she doesn't calm down and slow down, she's going to disrupt this for all of us, right? And so I think about that as violence, right? Like, how do we actually police each other's identities and our ways of being? Because we've got to survive out here, and thinking that, if we just fill in the blank, then we will, make it. And no blank we've ever filled in with that has ever gotten us free right now. So I feel like the practice of locating oneself is a liberatory practice, because it's allowed me to reconnect with myself and reconnect with others in a way that is living revolution right now. And so that for me is really the way I've seen the violence enacted.
Heidi, you make me think about how because of the history of Black people in this country around being seen as hypersexual, hyper-immoral, hyper-violent, hyper-criminal, the ways I've been socialized as from being a Black girl to just to be super in tune with what is happening to Black boys and Black men. And so when violence is happening within the community, I am already playing out a tape of if we call the police, right? Police criminalize us. They're more likely to lock us up. If we get arrested, there's this less likelihood that we can get out faster. Then what happens to the children in our community? How does foster care play out? What happens at school with shaming? Now I've got to take off time from work to actually address this. I'd rather address it in a holistic way within community to disrupt violence, right? And so there's actually a historical imperative for my people, and for many people I know can identify with this, where violence actually continues to escalate and accelerate because of the history of the way different peoples are treated, right? We can look at that around gender, around sexuality, around so many things. So this practice of locating oneself and connecting it to history and to an historical framework is an absolute must. And then to some of the questions around the grief that comes up, we agree that there should be support for grieving. So what would our mental health services look like if they were using an emotional justice or a liberatory justice framework, as opposed to people who are grieving, people who are hurting, people who are experiencing mental unwellness as a result of oppression actually require different levels of analysis and treatment that are not exactly what we're given right now. And so we do think, while we support art as a way of healing all of the many forms of all of our peoples have culturally resisted, but that we need support to do this, right? And so how do we do that in community? How do we do that with conscious and liberatory therapists and practitioners and healers, right? So that we're not doing this alone. And that this process of locating oneself is external and internal. So there's times that we're reflecting in I'm doing my own journaling, or just thinking, or putting stories together, or being with an old photo album. And then there are times where, because liberation is a collective process, that I actually have to be doing it externally, but we're balancing that out and choosing.
Yeah, and I also just want to speak to, this practice of being able to locate yourself historically, especially again for white people, to be able to do that as a way to also repair. Right, sometimes there's a disconnect or a distance in not being able to build across racial lines, and some of that is the defensiveness or the distancing from your own histories. And so being able to engage that, one, as healing, but also as potential opportunities for repair. That we get to do present day, because we hold a lot of that history is getting carried with us, and we can't just shake it off like it hasn't happened and go forward.
Yeah. So as we kind of bring it into a close for now, this has been so exciting and so rich. The questions that we've posed are in this presentation as part of the insights here. And we're curious about from you all. So Chelsea, if you could put up the last poll question about if you were to think about an area of your own identity where you'd want to explore more and engage in this practice, what would that be, right? So, and it might be something that's not up here, it can be multiples, right? So the call that we're asking folks is to actually think about where in the next week or so, in the next few days, might you want to do some more engaging with your own story? Is it around race, tribal affiliation, gender, age, ability, sexuality, class, citizenship status, all of the above, possibly something that's not there?
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. And as this poll is coming up, I would love to just ask, Heidi and Archie, just to take 30 seconds, and all that abundant time, if you could, and just share, and just share a little bit about, what are you reclaiming? What is your source of inspiration as you continue to locate yourself in your journey?
Well, I really, Ariel's video on race and resonated with me, where it's like, I've had to really put race and gender so much in the center of my life that I'm really excited about the ways that my queerness is showing up and how I get to explore and be with that, and as a way to say, like, there's this part of me that I just haven't explored as much. So that feels exciting and very alive for me right now.
Thank you.
I think for me, if I think about inspiration in a positive sense, I definitely think about this group and those who are on this webinar and all of us who are struggling together. I think that inspires me to keep moving and keep pressing. In a less sort of positive sense, I think this the environment that I and we all find ourselves in right now in the United States, where immigrants are being scapegoated, people because of their faith are being racialized. I think there is no time like now to start taking a really critical look at why this country's policies are set up the way they are and what we all need to do to get up and change them. And that's what I'm here for. And I'm waking up a little bit more every day as I try to find new ways to attack.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everybody. As we said, this PowerPoint presentation will be available to you. We also ask that you fill out the evaluation. And we are so excited that you would be part of this conversation with us. Like almost 500 people were part of this live conversation. So we know, yes, right, to our own collective liberation. And so this last image that we have here is just a guide around, like, when people ask us, how do you do this? Just these are some one of the many ways that we do it. We encourage you to do it if you're an artist or you're not, to think about art, to think about song, to think about stories, to use pictures, to use your bodies, to be out in nature, to walk, to just get a sense of whose land are you on, who are the people that lived here before your people. All of that is part of locating oneself, and to have some compassion with yourself and your people, right? That systems of oppression were yoking all of our people, asking all of our people to be complicit. And so how do we have compassion for ourselves, for our histories, and decide to make different choices? So thanks, everyone. If